Museums have an incredibly important role in telling the story of this continent. So what I've done with my own work is to challenge the museums that I work with to tell the story and to start that story from somewhere else. I went to college and actually studied to become an illustrator. Soon after, I realized that I wanted to be a real painter, to actually return to representational art making because the themes that I was exploring in my art practice had to do with themes that felt very urgent to me, and they had to do with the ongoing impact of the colonial project on my family and in my community. I was also discovering the art history that was made on this continent by settler artists who were looking at Indigenous people as subjects for their art. And that was my entry point to challenge their work, to challenge the subjectivity of their work, and to reverse the gaze. It became a very important project for me to really take on the weight of this art history.
He was doing something that others were not doing, and that was intentionally using the colonial gaze to flip the power dynamics in the authoring of art history.
There are specific figures that you can really empathize with. And even when it's talking about the past, talking about the future, talking about imagined scenarios, you just get it.
I was really blown away by Kent's work addressing grand narratives of European art history, European settler colonial practices around the world head on, and to really see Indigenous perspectives front, right, and center.
Large paintings have this kind of authority that I think is what I wanted to also invest my work with. So that's really what I wanted to do with my practice, was to imbue Indigenous experience, historical and contemporary, with that same gravitas, that same weight and authority that the European version of this history has.
The painting History is Painted by the Victors is what inspired the entire exhibition. This particular work, I think, truly encapsulates a variety of aspects of what we're trying to do in the exhibition, and that is to look at the power dynamics on the authoring of histories. So you see in this painting Miss Chief painting at an easel and depicting Lieutenant Colonel George Custer in the 7th Cavalry. Of course, the romanticized landscape is a recreation of Albert Bierstadt's Mount Corcoran. Very rarely have Indigenous people been given a platform to even visually express their own histories and their own experiences.
Of course, there was a great deal of respect and admiration for the level of skill required, but I also knew that these paintings had the ability and they had the possibility to tell stories, to hold narratives. And it was these narratives of Indigenous perspectives, experiences, both historical and contemporary, that I wanted to express through this very sophisticated language of painting. There is a resistance in my work in pushing back. I wouldn't describe it as anger, but I would say that there is a level of challenge to the authority that their paintings had in our museums, telling a very narrow perspective of history.
This painting is titled The Great Mystery, and it's based on looking at two works within the Hood Museum collection by Mark Rothko, of course, with this background from 1953, and then a Cyrus Dallin sculpture, really stereotypical idea of an Indigenous warrior on horseback. But instead of that, we have Miss Chief with shoulders raised and really offering a perplexed look at the audience, perhaps asking, what are you going to do with the knowledge that has been imparted with you? And also thinking, of course, about reality, about existence.
So humor is an important part of my work. It's a strategy, it's a device I've used to entice people to my work, to soften people with a laugh, to give them a moment to look at some dark subjects, but also like a pressure valve. When settlers arrived and they encountered two-spirit people, gender-fluid people here in North America, they struggled understanding how there could exist a person in a community who was accepted for that and wasn't treated as an outsider or discarded. Miss Chief Eagle Testicle was created as an alter ego to kind of reverse the gaze and look back at those settler artists and say, well, we're here, I'm here, and I have a voice and I have a perspective and it's different than yours. And in creating that character, I wanted a very empowered, gender-fluid character that could speak to Indigenous understanding of gender and sexuality that was very different from the European idea, this very binary version of male-female.
And that's the beauty of a character like Mischief, his alter ego, who is a time-traveling, shape-shifting trickster. Mischief can bring together people from different time periods. So in this painting, she's brought together elders, people who can pass along knowledge, as well as, very young babies who are the future of their tribes, and bringing them all together in this beautiful interstellar scene. And a lot of these are specific myths that inform native cosmology and native astronomy. It's so hopeful.
A very wise person that I looked up to, an Indigenous senator named Murray Sinclair. He advised our community, let's not attract more vitriol and hate from our settler neighbors. Let's build monuments to our own people. And so that's what I decided to do. Because I'm a painter, I decided to make portraits, to authorize people in my community that I admire. It's very important that as my career moves forward, that I bring these people from my community and shine light on them. The boarding school program here in the States, residential schools in Canada, it was about trying to assimilate Indigenous people into the mainstream culture by taking children and putting them into basically an indoctrination camp where they would be forbidden to speak their language, where they would be forced to learn English. And most of those schools functioned as labor camps for young children. So my grandmother was one of those young girls who was put into a residential school with her siblings. And that continues to have intergenerational impact in our communities and in our families. So it really has become an important part of my work to bring these truths forward, because most people in North America know very little about this very important part of the history of this continent that had to do with dispossession and attempts at erasure.
I think in this part of the Great Lakes region, it's really important to have Indigenous perspectives that speak directly to the lived experience of Indigenous peoples in this part of the world.
One of the goals that Liuli and I share is that when people walk away from this exhibition, we hope that they've learned a little bit more about themselves by the way that they respond to the work.
So I think people are going to have a lot of emotions, but I hope what they come out of it with is a sort of catharsis of understanding that as long as we are working together as a community and acknowledging some of our past, we can build a better future.
There are so many great museums all throughout this continent, and having an opportunity to bring my exhibition to Ohio is super exciting. People can read news feeds all day long, but there's something about the way a painting also specifically can really grab you. I think it's unlike anything else. It's about opening a portal into a whole universe that some people might have never thought about before, but it's been here the entire time.